I'm Dr. Ken Beatty, and I'm very, very happy to be here today talking to you, I think, from many, many different countries. So the people are still coming in. Lots of people are joining us and will continue to join us for a while. I believe that afterwards, after the presentation, there will also be a video of this. And at the very end, I'm also going to give you my email. So if you have any questions whatsoever, you can ask me after. But we'd also have a little bit of time. I'm going to try to finish, 5 or 10 minutes early before the hour, and so that if you have some questions, we would love to hear them, and anything that comes up as we're going along. While I'm talking, I can't answer questions, but at the end of it, I'll be able to. So please, you can add those questions to the chat line, and the team will get them and feed them back to me at the very end. Okay, great. So let's begin. We're talking today about new approaches and materials for the adult classroom. Okay, so I think you're thinking, oh, why do we need new approaches? Why do we need new materials? Isn't what we're doing good enough? That's some people. Some people are always thinking, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. But the great thing for me, the wonderful, wonderful thing for me is that all of you are taking a little bit of time out of your schedule today to be a little more educated, to learn a little bit more, to try to find some new tips and new tricks to help your students. Ours is a nurturing profession. We are all mothers when we're teachers, even if we're men like myself. We're all aiming to help our students as much as possible in any way that we can, and always finding out a little bit more information that might put us in that direction is always useful. So I'll try to give you some practical and useful information and some advice today as we go through the session. So we can start off with a little question. So this was me. I was in Liverpool 2-3 weeks ago at IATEFL conference and doing a seminar there. But I had this question, how different is your own language classroom from the classroom where you learned English? So it's something I reflect on. It's like, what is the changes? What changes are going on in language learning classrooms? Well, in some cases, we're teaching the same way that we were taught and the same way our teachers were taught. In other cases, there can be small differences. So when I studied French, it was just a teacher at the front of the classroom and 30 students sitting there listening. When I studied Spanish in high school, it was the same thing. But then I went to university, and university they had technology, they had a language lab, and that was like a new innovation. I'm not sure it worked because my Spanish is terrible. I'm so embarrassed every time. In fact, I studied really Spanish for 4 years, and it's still terrible. There's no excuse for me. But anyway, I partly blame the technology being not very good. Just listening to those tapes over and over again wasn't really helpful. So we go on, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. So I always think about, well, what do we need in the classroom? And do we even need that technology in the classroom? So this is a classic conversation I had at dinner one night with 2 other professors, Professor Andy Curtis and Professor Rod Ellis, both famous guys. So the 3 of us were sitting there, and we were talking about teaching, as of course you do. And I told them this story of when I first started teaching university in China. And I was teaching methodologies, how to teach, teaching teachers how to teach, basically. And I was giving them all these ideas and things. And then finally, they, about after a week or 2 weeks, they say, oh, Dr. Ken, would you like to come and visit our classroom? I said, I would love to visit a classroom. And so I went to, so that Saturday, Saturday morning, I went to see the students because they went to school Saturday morning. And it was sort of an elementary or secondary, I guess they were secondary school students. And I walked in and I saw the problem. The problem was I was teaching about like how to use overhead projectors and tape recorders and, different things like this to teach. And I walked into the classroom, they had a blackboard and they had benches. They did not even have desks. There was not even desks in this place. So I sort of understood the reason they invited me was to show me, please, Dr. Ken, we don't have that much technology to work with. Maybe you could teach some different ways. So I had to adjust my teaching. So I told this story, and Andy Curtis says, "Oh, that's nothing." He said, "I was at a classroom where they had no walls." And I said, "What do you mean no walls?" And he said, "I was in India, and in India they put down a rug, and the teacher comes and teaches there. So there's no school, there's no classroom." It's just a rug on the ground. If the students want to write, they take their finger and they go into the dust and they write their letters and numbers in the dust. And that's how they learn. And of course, Rod Ellis, older than both of us, and he has to be the expert. So he says, "Oh, that's nothing." He said, "I went to a classroom in Africa where there was no teacher." We said, "What do you mean no teacher?" He said, "Well, there was a teacher sometimes." He said, "But the teacher was also the taxi driver." And what would happen is he would start teaching, and again, it was under a tree. There was not even a rug. It was just under a tree, and all the kids would come and to listen to him. And then he would get a phone call. Somebody needed a taxi, and so he'd go off, and then the kids would wait, and maybe they wait an hour. If he doesn't come back, then maybe they just go home. So anyway, so what's the point of the stories? What's the point of the stories? We have to always examine what do we need in our classrooms and what makes learning better. Now, I'm not saying that we should go back to teaching underneath a tree and driving taxi part-time, but what I am saying is that sometimes the technology or the materials aren't the only way to learn. We can learn in different ways. But if we do use materials in our classroom, and I think all of us do, then we need to make sure that they're good materials and they're really addressing the needs of the students in some interesting way. So this brings us to this big question of why do we need change in the language classroom? Why do we need to change things? We've been maybe doing things the same way. You learned English, with the technologies or lack of technology that your teachers had. Your teachers, learned obviously language just with a book and a teacher, and that was it. So why do we need to change things today? Well, that's really the big question that I'm going to try to answer in today's webinar. So let's see if I can do that or not. So let's go back and first of all, think about this question. What has changed in schools in 200 years? And when I talk about schools, I'm really talking mostly about the language classroom. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, computers, right? And of course, doing what I'm doing today is fantastic. We have this opportunity to learn online. And I had a wonderful conversation with one of my students. I teach graduate students and doctoral students now. And one of my students was in Colombia, but she was in the forest. She was in the jungle, and she taught the Indian children. And they walked to her school. So anyway, one time she wrote me. She said, "Oh, sorry, I missed the class, but there was a flood and the bridge came out and there was no electricity." And I said, "Okay, that's fine." But I said, "Where exactly do you live?" And she lived in a very, very small village, but she was doing her master's degree with me. And I thought, how interesting, because she could only do that through technology. So obviously technology is doing one big thing, is it's improving access. It's improving access to learning. But what hasn't changed? So that's one big thing that has changed, and computers have really changed everything. But what are some other things that have not changed? Well, there's lots of things that have not changed very much in 200 years. In classrooms today, we still have a huge focus on memorization. The students are expected just to memorize, and learn. And we tell them, learn this, study it, repeat it 100 times, things like that. And of course, we have to remember. But the ways in which we teach memorization of materials, can be very discouraging for students in some cases. There is very little critical thinking in the classroom. We just don't see very much of it at all. Students are told things, they're expected again to remember it, and they're not really asked to think about it. So you might say, what is the capital of France? Something like that. And say, "Oh, Paris, Paris," you've got the answer. But a better question would be, why is Paris the capital of France? Why did it become the capital of France? So there you would have to really think and look back at history and draw on some different questions and ideas, and that would force you to think. Why is critical thinking important? It's not because we don't have the answers. We do. We always have answers. And of course, today with Google, everybody has more answers than they've ever had before. It's really, really easy to look up information. But that's not the point. We need to be able to challenge information. We need to be able to question it in some ways. So critical thinking is really important for life. It's a lifetime skill. Another big thing that really hasn't changed very much is we have a group mentality. That means all students learn the same thing. We all teach everyone the same thing. Now, I know in your classrooms you probably don't, and I'm generalizing here, and you're saying, oh no, I don't do that. I try to individualize the instruction much more. But generally, we don't. And the materials that we use, they don't do it either. They try to teach everyone like they don't know anything, and we'll tell them everything, and they should all learn the same things, and then we'll test them the same way to see who is the best and who is not so good. That's kind of like old thinking now. Part of the problem are static materials that don't change very much. When I was in grade 7, 100 years ago, we had a textbook that was so old, but it was hardcover, so they couldn't throw it out because they said, well, it's still good. But the information had become very, very outdated. Now we're much better off because with a lot of online materials and new textbooks, they change quite frequently. They can keep up to date. Another thing that has really not changed very much in 200 years is our classes tend to be still very teacher-centered. We talk a lot about learner-centered classrooms, and I even go visit teachers who say they're teaching learner-centered classrooms. But when I get there, then the teacher's still talking for 40 minutes and the students are like, falling asleep. So again, it's something we need to work on, something we need to change. But again, sometimes it's partly because of our resources, sometimes because of the materials we're using. And that's another problem, is limited resources. And again, with the computers, with online learning and things like that, it's really unlimited resources that we have. Although, again, you need critical thinking to decide, is it a good resource or is it maybe something that's not so good? So today's learners are really, we need something new for them for some other reasons. You know, essentially, they are different. They have different needs, not just as a group, but individually they have different needs. They all have very, very different needs. So we need to be able to address those needs in some different ways. So what are some of the differences between the learners today from, 200 years ago or even 20 years ago? First of all, they're very visual learners, very visual learners. This is a generation who has grown up for the first time with infographics. Infographics, what's that? It's a chart or something that shows you all sorts of ideas put together in some interesting way. So visual learning is an extremely important part of it. And of course, they're exposed to so much visual material. They're exposed, on computers, on advertising, magazines, everything else. They get so many messages throughout a day. When you look at old cities and you go sort of, look down the streets and things, you see so little advertising, so little text, so few messages, and it's completely changed now. And so we live in a far more visual world in terms of language messages that students are getting. The second point is we have an expectation of far greater collaboration. Now, the opposite of collaboration is really competition, and that's been the model for schools for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, is you're always making students compete against each other. And for some subjects, oh, maybe that's okay, I don't know, but not for language learning. Language learning is, at essence, a collaborative activity. We are always collaborating when we speak to another person. We're talking to them in real time and trying to understand what they say and negotiate meaning and share our ideas and understand their ideas and debate. All these things involve collaboration, not just competition, one person shouting as much as they can to be heard over everyone else. Third one, we've already talked about a little bit, critical thinking. Again, the students are not just critical thinkers more this day, but they're more interested in critical thinking because it is the single greatest skill that they're going to need for the new jobs that are coming. And we don't even know what those jobs will be, right? Like 40 years ago, there was no such thing as a computer scientist, right? There was mathematicians and physicists, but no computer scientists 40 years ago. And now it's such a common, occupation. So what will our students today be doing in 40 years? We can't really predict it. We're not quite sure. But what we can do is we can give them the skills that will prepare them for that in some way. The digital environment, here we are having a webinar. I'm in Canada, you're in all different countries around the world. It's so exciting. It's really an amazing thing that we can do this, and you're surrounded by digital devices. Some of you will have an Apple Watch or some sort of maybe a fitness tracker on you. You'll have your mobile phones, probably all of you checking your messages as I speak. It is a digital environment. Students are not just growing up on it, but again, it reflects on the work that they're going to be doing. It reflects on the work that they will have to do in the coming years. They will have to work digitally. So they need skill sets around that. And the last one is interesting, is control of their own language learning. So remember I made this point about, everybody, the group mentality, everybody learning the same thing. Well, the truth of the matter is that we all need different language, right? So I need different language than other people. When I travel to, Latin America or China or Europe, whatever, I need to be able to use language to explain who I am, to what my interests are, what my problems are, or issues that I have, or things that I'm interested in. And I need to be able to explain that in the target language. And everybody's going to be a little bit different. I have to say I'm a professor, right? I have to say that I'm a writer. I have to say, I live in Isla Pequeña. I live on a very small island, right? So all of these things are a little bit different for each person. And so students want to control their own language learning a little bit, not just to specialize in the vocabulary and the phrases that they're learning, but also they want to be able to control things if they're not learning and have chances to learn a little bit more, a little bit faster, or catch up with the other students. Again, students today, overwhelmingly, they expect to pass. They expect that they will succeed. Nobody goes to university saying, oh, maybe I'll win, maybe I'll pass, maybe I won't pass. They all expect to succeed, and their parents do, and their teachers should as well. We shouldn't use the classroom as a place where we say, yes, you're good, you're not good. Okay, so I'm going to use some examples from something I've been working on for the last 2 years. This is a startup. I didn't write it, or I wrote parts of it, but we were actually 40 writers, 40 different writers working on this, 211 people altogether. But it's a new series, 8 levels. It's four skills, and it's aimed at adults and young adults. So I'm going to use some examples from this. Maybe you're not teaching adults and young adults. Don't leave, it's okay. I think the principles that I'm talking about are ones that you can apply to your own classrooms and your own teaching. But I'm just telling you that I'm using some examples from this book just to give you an idea about how some things can work together. So Startup is a new series that's based on problems that teachers have and based on problems that students have. So it's published by Pearson, and Pearson, of course, is the largest publisher in the world. But what a lot of people don't know is it's also got a massive research arm. So it's constantly researching all around the world with different focus groups, and they visit different countries, they talk to teachers, they go into classrooms, they interview students, they have activities with them to say, what are your problems? What are you looking at? What issues are you having? And so it all feeds back to people like me and my publishers, and all together we try to think, well, what do teachers really need now, and how could we make it a little bit better? So what the teachers need, and also what students need now as well. So it's all something we're looking at. So 4 areas that we basically identified after talking to so many teachers and so many students was that today's learner really needs these sort of 4 different things. So the first one is new skills. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, I bet one of those is critical thinking. Yes, you're right. Of course, they need a lot more critical thinking skills. And of course, you can say, well, they need that, but how do you make it possible for students to think critically? They need new content, and you only have to look at old textbooks and you sort of think, oh my goodness, look at that phone, it's the size of a shoe or something, and you think, yeah, that's kind of old pictures, old stories, old things that are not really true anymore. If some situations that just don't happen anymore, you want to get rid of those, and students become bored if they think, oh yes, this is old, it's not relating to me or to my life. We need some kinds of tools, new tools, and we already mentioned those digital tools that students need. They are using their phones, and I always talk about this, we want them to use it for the force of good, not the force of evil, for phones. So finding some ways to, they're going to use their phones anyway in the classroom and outside of the classroom. What if we can use that to help them to learn language in some ways? So tools is a really important one. We also recognize that there are new contexts in which language is being used. So it's interesting because I have done a lot of work on another series, Learning English for Academic Purposes, or LEAP. And, it's very focused on one very specific area, academic English. But actually there's many different Englishes that students need to use, and they need to use them interchangeably and all together sometimes. Social English, they need to use employment English, something for the workplace, and of course academic English as well. So let's look at a few ideas around these 4 areas. I'm going to go through them one at a time. And again, I just want to remind you right now, if you have some questions, write them down and ask at the end. I'll make some time for that. And if we don't have time for all the questions, I'll write you individually and answer any questions that you have, okay? Let's go on. Okay, so first of all, today's new skills. So what are those new skills? We mentioned critical thinking, but what other sorts of skills do students need to succeed today? Succeed both academically, but also when they graduate. And they go out into the workplace, what's going to help them to succeed there in the workplace at some point? Well, first of all, we have to establish the fact that new skills and new attitudes are necessary. Again, we've got lots of old thinking, and I love this cartoon from more than 100 years ago, I hope. It says, the mother sways the domain of the heart, the father that of the intellect. And this was so-called fireside education, and it was saying that mothers were only good for teaching things around the heart. And you can see the 2 children being friendly with each other, giving each other a kiss, and the father is teaching him about the moon, and he's holding the hand on the atlas and everything else. Well, this is of course an old attitude, and we're a lot of attitudes around language education, both the teaching and the learning are changing, and they need to change. And again, the skills that we expect students to have are changing, but also the skills that we expect teachers to have are changing as well. So skills help learners organize their mind in some different ways. And you all have these typical things, a picture and words. That was this idea of putting pictures and words together only really started around 1657. Comenius was the first person to publish a little textbook. He was a Czech educator, very forward-thinking, and he drew little pictures to go with the words of things. That was like unbelievable, new thinking. But so again, we just take it for granted now. But again, we have to understand, like, oh yeah, seeing the image and understanding the words, they go together. Curiously, I was talking about this with a teacher, an elementary school teacher, and he said something interesting. He said, students today, young students, they don't go to the dictionary. When they look up a word, they don't go to the dictionary, they go to images. So they click on Google Images and they see a bunch of pictures of dogs or something, whatever they're looking up, and they will see what they're looking for and get a general impression from many pictures. It's interesting. So there's a tip, there's a trick for you. It's an alternative to the dictionary. Of course, it doesn't replace the dictionary, but it's an alternative way to sort of look up ideas, new vocabulary in different ways, because you can get images, but also sometimes video as well. But the other sorts of things are graphical organizers, things like this Venn diagram. You've seen these before, these interlocking circles where, you know, there's some things indoors, for example, some things outdoors, and then some things that are both. What's interesting here is that, you know, this Venn diagram, you think, oh yeah, I've seen that before. The students have seen that before, but really, this is a way to make them think differently. And you often understand, you can probably think yourself the first time you saw a Venn diagram, and then maybe the first time you started using it. But before you started using it, before you started drawing them yourselves, you probably started to think in terms of Venn diagrams and how things overlap in some cases. So again, graphical organizers are all ways of shaping the thinking that students have. We need skills that help learners to help themselves. So this book, like many books, they have writing skills. So for example, how do you write dates? And this is an interesting one because different cultures in your first language, you probably write, you know, for example, the day, so it would be 5 January 2018, not 5 January 5th, 2018. So, but this, you know, when you're learning a language, you have to learn all the little conventions, how things are written. When I was studying Spanish, I had to learn to write the question mark upside down at the beginning of the sentence. That was new for me. It was like, oh, and I see some students still do that when they're learning English. And of course, they have to stop doing that because it's not appropriate. The other thing that helps students a lot is writing plans. So too often we tell students, we say, write a draft first. But it's far better if they do some drawing, organize it, do a little mind map, put your big idea there and then draw some lines to other ideas. So these are the types of skills that help learners to think a little bit better, to think a little bit differently. Again, some of your students may already do this, but I'm always shocked. I'm always surprised that, you know, not all students do, because they're not told to, they're not asked to, they're not given the opportunity to practice, and because they don't practice, they don't think it's useful. Instead, they think, oh, I have to write my essay or I have to write my paragraph. I'll just start right now. No planning, no rough draft, no notes, no outline, and it's a waste of time. It's a skill in thinking is actually to organize your thoughts this way. There's lots of skills that help students to collaborate. Again, I mentioned before, you know, working together is really essential to language. Language is a collaborative act. It's something we always collaborate on. But it's also increasingly one of the most important skills in the workplace. And a lot of employers now, that's one thing they're asking for or looking for and interviewing about, is they're looking and saying, what are your collaboration skills? How well do you work with others? And can you, for example, can you work with others and solve problems together easily? What happens when you're in a conflict? And so people often ask this question in interviews. They say, what if you had a conflict with another employee about something? How would you sort it out? Well, that's part of collaboration, is being able to give and take and understand someone else's point of view and work with it. So, you know, giving students opportunities, again, makes a difference. It makes a difference when we can do that. So here, the last part is this idea of revising your writing and then asking students to peer edit. I love peer editing. Why? Because everybody benefits. You know, for my own graduate students, I say to them, don't make me the first one to read your essay. Share it with another student. Share it with another student first. Let them look at it and exchange papers. Who benefits? Well, first of all, the student who wrote the paper benefits, because maybe that other student will catch some typos or some small mistakes or grammar or spelling or something like that. The student who reads it benefits, because they will get practice in editing, and they might see sometimes a weaker paper, but they might also sometimes see a better paper and think, oh, this is someone else in my class who's at a higher level. What can I do to get to that higher level? And then, of course, I benefit because I get a better paper handed into me. So again, this whole idea of peer editing, it builds collaborative skills, but again, it benefits everybody involved. So skills can also help make learning much more personal. And this is a key thing we talked about, the fact that, again, not everybody needs the same language. You have to think about how you would talk about topics that interest you. So for example, this one is great. It says, make it personal. Plan an interesting dish. This is the low level. This is at the first level of the series. Use words in 1A, give it a name. What do you need to make the dish? Let's make a chicken dish. Got some modeling there. Okay, we need chicken and onion, things like that. Our dish is called Grandma's Chicken. It has onions, tomato, and of course they have to continue and do something else. That's just, the models are just an example. They're not using that to actually build their essay. Okay, so again, but these personalization skills make students think about learning more, because they're thinking, what does it mean to me? You could teach them about food, and 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you say, okay, here's a list of ingredients, memorize them. We'll have a test on it next day, and students will forget it, you know, the day after the test. But if you say, write a recipe about something with using these ingredients, they'll think, I think my grandma makes this dish, and how do I make it? And so it's personalizing actually as a skill to better learn, to remember things. So what do we know? What do we know? What are some insights that we have? Well, first of all, we can say learners need skills to help them collaborate and not to compete, because again, language is a collaborative activity. It's not a competitive activity. Unless even if you're in a debate and you're screaming and you're trying to be heard over somebody else, it still takes collaboration with your own team members and really listening carefully to the other person to give a contrary argument. It's not just won by shouting. Secondly, students need lifelong learning strategies. What do you mean? Why lifelong? Well, because we're never finished learning a language. We're never ever finished. I'm a good example of somebody who speaks English pretty good, you know, pretty well, we would say. But I'm still learning language. You know, I'm reading a new novel right now, and there's new words in it I haven't seen before, so I'm improving my vocabulary. I'm always picking up new genres, so we never stop learning. And so we need students to give students those skills, so once they leave the classroom, they can continue to improve their language learning. So what are some strategies? What are some strategies we can use to do this? Well, first of all, give learners more independence and give them more responsibility. Remember we talked about that teacher-centered classroom from 200 years ago and maybe yesterday? Change that. Give them more independence. Ask students to do some of the teaching from time to time. Give them more responsibility. You know, what assignments would you like to do? You know, how can you show me what you know? One of my favorite questions. How can you show me what you know? Instead of me just telling you everything, you know, demonstrate how you understand. Have them identify their skills and their needs, so have them self-reflect. Say, what are you good at? Are you good at this? Where do you need more work? Again, that's making it their responsibility. And develop skills through practice. So we talk about strategies and skills. Strategies are the conscious attempts when you're really thinking about it. Skills are when you practice, and you no longer think about it, right? You don't think about walking anymore. When you were a little baby, of course, you're like, oh, what am I doing? I'm going to fall over. But, you know, once you learn, you don't think about it anymore. You just do it. So skills are developed through practice. Okay, what's the second point? The second point is about new content. Okay, so content needs to relate to the real world. Now remember, I told you about Comenius, this Czech guy who illustrated books. Well, this was the sort of thing that he did. And you know, this book was used in the beginning of in the 1700s in the United States. It's very old, and you can see the text is not very engaging or very interesting, and it's also not the type of language that you would use on a daily basis. You know, a dog will bite a thief at night. It's not really sort of meant to teach anyone anything. that would be really useful. And one of the things here, I just noticed actually on the other page there, fornication as one of the words. Terrible. You never teach that to students, I don't think. Okay, what else? What else? Modern topics. So again, modern topics is trying to think about what do students need to talk about today? What are they talking about? What are the issues that they face? Well, certainly when you're looking at this like an office context, you think, yeah, that's where students can imagine themselves. And this same context of an office could be a classroom, it could be a meeting, it could be a sales pitch, it could be a group, discussion, lots of different things. But we need modern topics to do that. That really starts with actually what are the current realities of what learners are reading now. So I wish I could all see you in person. I wish I could say, how many of you have read a book of essays this week, right? And I'm sure I'd be shocked if there was more than one. But if I say, how many of you have read a blog this week or read something online? I'm sure everyone would put up their hand, right? So again, Startup, one thing this new series is doing is it's sort of, again, that's the information that we got from teachers like you and from students is, they want current, text. So this is like a members profile for a Happy Hikers Club. And again, it's giving a lot of the same information we might have given 10 years ago, but it's presenting it in a format that's much more engaging and more realistic and more useful for students. And of course, they will go afterwards and they'll be, on a dating site or on some group site that they want to join, and there'll be similar things. And they will transfer what they've learned in the book to real life. Reading, writing, listening, and speaking and grammar, it's all extremely important. I think like many of you, I probably hate grammar. Grammar is something that should exist behind. You shouldn't always be thinking about grammar when you're speaking or reading or writing or listening. It should be at the back of your mind. So we have to teach it, but we have to teach it in a way that it goes into the back of your mind. So Startup does that in a lot of different ways. One of the ways that's really interesting and innovative and fits with a lot of the issues we've been talking about so far is with technology. So there's tons of videos, and these little videos are people who teach inductively. Inductive, what does that mean? Inductively. Inductively means that she gives a little talk. In this case, she's talking about regular and irregular plurals. So she starts off saying, oh, there's a big sale this week. So there's sales on men's and women's and children's clothing, things like pants and shirts. And of course, you know what she's doing because you're teachers, right? She's using examples of regular and irregular plurals. And then, of course, she explains them. She uses them examples. But the inductive part is she's just talking at the beginning, and you have to figure out why is she saying all that? And then you go, aha, I see. Here's the rules and how it works. So these little videos are available to the students, and they're available on their phones. They get a kind of an app that comes with the series, and so they can watch it. Not just once, but maybe 100 times. If they don't get it, they can keep watching. This again is talking about differences in technology between 10 years ago or 5 years ago. I mean, we show videos in class, but then after the students leave or if the student misses a class, they don't have it anymore. But again, we can put it on their phones and they can look at it all the time, right? Reading, writing, and listening is also the other really important thing for students is pronunciation. But again, some students get it and some students don't. Some students don't need much work, and some students need a lot of work. So again, the whole idea is to have a pronunciation coach, again, with these little videos. And so we do that. And again, it's very inductive, where he uses the pronunciation, then points out, what is the difference? Do you dance? Yes, I do, right? So that's a strong do. And the second one, do you dance? Soft do. Yes, or weak do. Yes, I do, right? It's pronounced more strongly. It's an explanation. So you're listening, you're watching the person, you're hearing it. And the watching is a really important part. Like you could do this in audio, but somehow seeing somebody do it, it makes a big difference. It makes it a lot easier to understand. So again, it's just kind of a new way of learning that we're doing a little bit differently now. Another big thing is to always focus on learner interests. And this is actually my favorite part of the book, is they have these cool media projects. Now, I love this because I love taking photographs. I travel a lot. I'm going to 12 countries this year. I've just been in France and Turkey and England, and now I'm going to, and the US, and now I'm going to go to 2 weeks, I'm going to Colombia and Peru, and then later I'm going to Brazil and Bolivia and Mexico, and then Japan and Thailand this year. How exciting! But one big thing is I take a lot of photos when I go. So I love this idea of this media projects. So what happens here is it has a little bit of a video, and this guy Lucas, he does some kind of martial arts there. So and then when does he take classes? We've got some questions about this sort of thing. And then you have to do your own. You have to make a video about something that you do, or maybe a friend that you know. Think about the people you know. What do they do in their free time? So you can go videotape a friend, or you could videotape yourself doing something, and then you have to edit it and come back. But it's focusing on your interests, because again, you want to talk about the things that you do, not just generally what everybody does. But if somebody says to me, say, Ken, do you play a musical instrument? I say, oh yeah, I play the cello and I play piano, right? So they say, oh, but I'm not going to say, I don't have to learn the word saxophone in every language, because I don't play the saxophone or the violin, right? So it's a little bit different, yeah? So focus on yourself. So the insights from this are learners need modern content. So up-to-date things. New content has to relate to the learner's interests. It's no sense having just always things that are so general. They won't memorize it. They won't remember it because it's not meaningful. And new content needs to be integrated with multiple skills. So if you're learning grammar, you should learn grammar with reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Pronunciation, of course, listening and speaking both. But also pronunciation, facial expressions that go with it, body language that goes with it, that's all important as well. Okay, what are some strategies we can use here? Well, look for opportunities to personalize content around learners' needs and interests. You do this in any classroom. Always try to ask that question, why is this interesting for my students? Or better yet, ask the students, why do you think you will find this useful or interesting? Make learners more responsible for their own learning. Make them, get interested in topics. Ask them, say, what do you do? Can you learn how to say that in English or talk about that in English? Okay, the third point has to do with new tools. And I think you know what that new tool is. The biggest one is, of course, using our phones in different ways. Learners need tools, and they need tools beyond books, pens, paper, chalk, and blackboard. That's all I had when I was growing up. That's all that I was using in most schools. Even in university, we started using computers very late. I'm very old, you can tell that. But now, of course, every student has computers or laptops or phones or something. But they need to use those tools, but they need to use them in intelligent ways. So phones have really changed everything. So again, another cool thing about the startup series is they have, throughout each unit, they've got one character, and he's texting, he's messaging people, right? So the texts are kind of summaries of what the page is maybe about, and so it gets a kickstart of it. And of course, students love this because they relate, because they send so many texts themselves. So back in NYC, what's that? Oh, New York City for a few days. Not a good start to the day. I'm already late. Okay, so getting some grammar probably in there, some of the vocabulary, but also just introducing some topics. Okay, so phones provide an opportunity to make learners more responsible. So again, I mentioned this already, but Startup comes with its own app, not just a general language app with some pictures and vocabulary and things, but an app that's really targeted toward the language that's being taught, the grammar, the pronunciation, the vocabulary, everything that's being taught very specifically in there. The way it does that is in the first 3 lessons. There's 5 lessons in every unit, 3 on listening and speaking, 1 on reading, 1 on writing. On the first 3 listening and speaking ones, there's these QR codes on the bottom of the page. So you snap it, and it takes you straight to additional exercises that are in the book to look at. So students are taught how to use this. It's very easy. They have the resources. It comes with the course. And then they can download things, what they want, when they want, and wherever they want. So they don't have to use a data plan to use it all the time. They can just, download what they need, and then it's on their phone for 24 months or something. And there's a lot of variety of tasks. So there's photos and questions, there's multiple choice, there's true false, all that sort of thing there. They can practice their listening and conversation using both the audio and the video files, so they can watch those files over and over again. And I already mentioned they have the pronunciation and the grammar coach videos on there as well. So what are the insights do we have from this? Well, first of all, the mobile phone has changed everything. It really has changed a great deal. And learners can use their phones as language learning tools, not as distractions. Because most teachers I talk to, I always ask teacher, I say, what sort of problems do you have in your classroom? I said 9 times out of 10, they'll start with phones. I hate the phones. Every kid has a phone now. So one of it's this whole idea, could we get them to use their phones in a good way? It would benefit everybody. So what strategies do we have? Well, first of all, integrate the phone into classroom practice. So Startup makes it very easy because it has phone-based projects and it's got the QR codes, and there's lots of opportunities for them to use their phones for additional practice. Second, encourage learners to use the student book plus the app and other resources to take charge of their own learning. So again, it's shifting responsibility to the students. When the student says, I don't get it, or I don't understand. No, I say, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, it's your problem. You're the one learning the language. Make an effort, do something. So again, shifting responsibility to the students, very important for us. Okay, so the last point, and then we'll have some time for questions, right? The last point is new contexts. These are changing as well for students. So we used to train learners to work in factories. I mean, that's, most learners would go to work in a factory. Of course, some people went into a trade of some kind, like a dentist or a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. But the vast number of people who went to school would either be working in factories or on farms. That was the principal employment. And in many countries, it still is. You go to places like Bangladesh, with clothing factories just going for miles and miles and miles around the countryside. So, yeah, but it's no longer the case. When we had everybody working in rows in factories, that's really sort of the format that we used for schools. I'm not sure which came first. Are factories built like schools, or are schools built like factories? Hard to know, but they had the same sort of format and organization for that reason. But it's no longer the case. Our contexts are different. Today's learners will work with their minds. The vast majority of students who graduate from university in particular, even from high school, they're not going to be working in factories. They're going to be using their minds in something, especially because robots are coming, right? We have so much automation in the workplace that why do we need human workers in a factory anymore when you could buy a robot that will do the job of 3 people working 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. It's basic economics. It just doesn't pay to have human workers in many cases. So it will change. So how do we prepare learners for the real context in which they will use language? So I mentioned this very briefly already. There's really 3 things. There's academic English, workplace English or employment English, and social English. Students need to use sort of all 3 in different ways. So Startup has a series. Again, this is not, it's not rocket science. It's simply talking to teachers and talking to students and saying, where are you using language? Where will you have to use language? And the answers we got were, well, we have to use it for learning, for academic English. The interesting thing was it's not just in university, but it's like when people graduate now and they get a job, they have to continue learning. So that academic English becomes useful for their entire life. especially things like reading skills, like making inferences. You're always going to do that. Writing skills, writing a list and things, using bullet points. These are straightforward and simple. Listening skills, listening for numbers. When somebody said, okay, I've got 3 points first. 3 first, that signposting that people are doing, being able to listen for that and know that. Same thing is with, so we have to have strategies that will help students to learn these things. So use actions to remember words. It's a great idea, right? So if you're learning the word phrase, play the guitar, play the guitar, do that while you're learning the phrase, and you will remember better. So again, Startup tries to use a lot of strategies like this to help students with what they're learning. Second one is workplace English. Again, we're all going to be in some kind of a job unless you win the lottery, you don't have to work. All of us will. So again, we have to introduce lots of language around workplace, and that's extremely important. And then the third one is social English. And in fact, the fact of the matter is that they all cross over. We tend to use all three in different contexts. You might be in a learning situation in the workplace. You're doing your work, but you're also talking at lunch or before a meeting to your coworkers. You need all three. You need to use all three together. So they're integrated. They're integrated they're integrated in life, and they're integrated in the startup series. Academic, workplace, and social English are combined in most units, since the focus is just very general like that. Okay, so what insights do we have from this? Well, teaching learners outdated context will not help them to get the jobs of the future. So I still see a lot of older textbooks talking about secretarial skills, and I'm just thinking, really, are people doing that still, or even faxing? Like, who sends faxes anymore? It's just not done. So it has to be modern contexts. We have to do that. Learners now need to use English in multiple contexts, and again, they have to collaborate more with it. So they have to, that collaboration, key to that is listening and speaking and thinking, critically thinking in between. What strategies can we use for this? Well, ask learners to recognize their personal language needs and use startup tools to help them meet them in some ways. So again, ask students, what do you have to learn? They'll say, what? I just came here. Aren't you supposed to know? Right? No, it's personal. So again, get them to focus on what they really need to learn. And that's that big thing about them taking more responsibility. And the second point is emphasize the need for lifelong learning. We've already mentioned this. Again, you don't stop learning just because you stop going to school. You will continue learning forever. And the more strategies that you have that will help you to do that, the better. So, summary, today's learners have different needs. They have far different needs. Those needs include new skills. They need new skills for the jobs, also just for university or for college studying, or just even if they're just learning a language. New skills to do that. There's new content. It has to be up to date because the world is changing, and they need to talk about the world today, not the world 50 years ago. They need new tools to do that. And fortunately, everyone has a phone. It's a supercomputer. It's a computer if it's used correctly. So again, finding some ways to make the best use of the phones in the classroom. It's a great way because students will always have their phones with them. A funny thing about startup is it's got so much on the app as the students, you've heard this before, right? Oh, sorry, teacher, I forgot to take my book home on the weekend, right? Say, really? And you didn't have your phone? Of course, no student ever loses their phone. They always have that, so they can always be practicing their English. And finally, new context. There's new context in which students are going to be using language in the future. Sometimes we don't know what they are, but we do know that they're going to be academic, they're going to be employment-based, and they're going to be a social English as well. So give them the opportunities to do that. Okay, so I used some examples from Startup. Again, it's a new series, 8 levels. I think it's terrific. It's already being used worldwide, just came out, but we're getting adoptions all over the world. Okay, questions, comments, suggestions. The best part of the entire presentation here is the last line here. That's my email address. So maybe you have some questions now, but if you don't, you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and think, oh, I should have asked this. That's okay. You can ask me later. So kenbeatty@mac.com. But right now, do we have any questions? Yeah, Sochi?
Hi, Ken. How are you, everybody? Okay, yes, you have a variety of questions here.
Good.
And greetings from all over the world, from Ukraine, Iowa, Mexico, Turkey, Ecuador. Everybody's greeting you.
Wow.
Okay, so, yeah. Okay,
Fantastic.
so the first question is, what's the difference between a strategy and a skill?
Okay, that's a fantastic question. I probably didn't explain it very well in the presentation, but a strategy is a conscious attempt on how to do something. It's when you're really not sure, like maybe you don't even know, like writing a list, for example, if you're writing a list of words that begin with different letters of the alphabet, you write the whole alphabet first and then you fill in the words. You know, that's a simple strategy. When you're reading an index or looking up recipes in the index or something, you know the guide words, how the guide words work. So it's going to be between the two guide words in the dictionary or in the index, and knowing that. Those strategies have to be taught. Sometimes they're observed, sometimes students pick them up, sometimes students will develop a strategy, a way to solve a problem on their own. But it's more efficient if we teach them that, but then they have to be practiced. And you just think about anything you've ever learned. I started piano in September, and of course I have to practice my scales. I'm practicing my scales. But after a while it becomes unconscious and I can just do it. I'm not thinking this, you know, oh, with this many flats, this many sharps. I just do it. I just do it. And then it has become a skill. So a strategy is a conscious attempt. When you no longer think about it, it's a skill. There we are.
Perfect. So as a second question we have, is the startup series available now?
Yes, yes, it is. Yeah, it's, as I mentioned, it's a good question. Yeah, I should have said that. It's 8 levels, and I think the first 4 levels are all out now. The second, levels 5 and 6 will be out by September, I think, and 7 and 8, you know, later in the year, around December, something like that. So yeah, it's all available, and if you need inspection copies, talk to your Pearson rep. They're happy to share those copies with you and let you know about the series as well. Yeah.
Perfect. You also mentioned an app for startup. Does it cost extra for the student?
No, it doesn't cost extra at all. Actually, you can even just go to the App Store right now, the Pearson Practice app. Look up the Pearson Practice app, and you can download it. And I think without even getting the book, you can get the first unit just so you can see what's on it. That's useful for students when they're just starting out. And then if you want to unlock the rest of the content, at the beginning of the book, they've got, you know, that little scratch off code, and you put the secret code in, and that gives students access to the app as well as to the student portal with lots of resources for them. For the teachers and the teacher books, it gives them access to Active Teach, to the app as well, and to many other teacher resources that they can use as well.
Thank you, Ken. We also have several questions more on the strategies in the classroom.
Right.
Maria asks, what happens when, as a teacher, you have a beginner's class, and their command of the language is very limited? How do you manage to talk less?
Right. Okay. So this is part of the. I mean, I understand the problem. I've worked with beginners as well. I know, and my heart goes out to you and praises you for your hard work. Yeah, it's a challenge, but this is an interesting idea. Is we all assume again that there are a class, that they're all the same. But actually, once you start looking at it, you'll find that everybody knows a little bit different language, and so even if they're beginners, you know, they've learned something, you know, they've learned some language, or if they speak, say, Spanish, there's, you know, you could ask the question, say, what words are almost the same in Spanish and English, right? And they probably will know. They will probably know lots of words that are similar. Even the word like English, inglés, is pretty close, but they can think about other words that are similar and different, and that's a starting point. But again, most students will know some language about some things. Otherwise, you have to send them back and sort of say, you know, what are you interested in? Can you learn some language about football, about soccer, right? How about you? Oh, oh, ballet. Oh, ballet, you love ballet. Okay, learn some words about that. And then try to teach the other students. So again, getting them more opportunities to become teachers themselves. They can do it. And also look ahead in the book and say, okay, you can see there's vocabulary next week. I want you to teach the students that. Me? And of course, give them all, you know, turns doing things like that. Give them a little time to prepare. So again, responsibility, build up more responsibility in your students.
Thank you, Ken. We have another question about challenges.
Yes.
What are the challenges that we can expect at the time of developing materials with new context, as well as implementing new curriculum in language classrooms? What would be the challenges?
Okay, all right. So yeah, there are always challenges. Yeah. So with a series like Startup, fortunately, you know, this is the feedback we got from teachers. They want a really, really, really good teacher's guide. And so the teacher's guide, they didn't just want the answers. They wanted hints, they wanted tips, they wanted notes on culture, they wanted deeper explanations of things if they needed them. And of course, you know, maybe you've been teaching for 40 years, you think you know everything, that's fine. You'll still learn something. But for a teacher who's just starting off, it's going to be very challenging. And so again, they can get a lot of support. Generally, students, you know, resist new things. They don't like to do something new. They say, well, this is not how we learned last year. And then you say, did you really learn last year? Like, why are you still here? But basically the problem is they're very conservative sometimes, and they want the teacher to talk. They don't want to talk, they just want to listen. But they have to realize they're not learning that way. So essentially, the biggest challenges that you face is you have to show that learning with new materials is more efficient, that they will learn faster, and it's more effective. They will remember and be able to use it more better. So look for those two key ideas, efficiency and effectiveness. And if you look at materials like Startup, they're really aimed at trying to help you with that, to be more efficient in the classroom and to be more effective by doing many of the things I talked about, making students more responsible, making learning more personal, just getting them much more involved in their own learning in different ways. Yeah.
Thank you. We also have a question regarding the videos. Are the videos part of the Startup series?
Yes, yes, yeah, the videos are all part of this Startup series. So they're on ActiveTeach. They're on the portal, the student portal and the teacher portal. But most importantly, they're also on the app, all on the app. So again, the students can walk away and look at them again and again and again. They can try speaking along with them and trying the speeches out and things like that. This is really important. It's really important because, you know, it gives a lot of clues with the videos. And a lot of the videos are humorous. They're sort of like interactions in the office, sort of people talking together, and they're kind of fun. So again, the point is not, you know, because we're trying to be comedians. The point is because when something's a little bit funny, you remember it more. You will remember it more. So that's sort of a key part of it. Now, a lot of people say, oh yeah, apps, I don't know, I tried Duolingo or some other apps and they didn't work so much. Well, no, it never does. The problem with a lot of very commercial apps is that most people use them for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks and then they stop using them. Why? Why do they stop using them? Well, quite often it's because they have no context. It's not related to what they're learning. It's maybe not useful information to them in some ways, you know, because you're learning about, I don't know, booking a hotel and you say, when do I go to a hotel? It's not useful. But with Startup, because it's so tied, so integrated with every page in the unit, it makes it it's much more useful. It's much more useful that way. So students do use it and they become engaged with it. They like it a lot. We've had students using it so far in some trials, and some students have started in some countries, and it's been very, very successful. They really like it. Yeah.
Are these level correlated adult model standards in the U.S.?
Sorry, the levels are related to?
Correlated to adult model standards in the U.S.?
Yes, they're based on the global scale of English, and the global scale of English is based on the CEFR. So they go through all the levels of the C. I'm just looking for a copy on my desk here. They go through all the levels of the CEFR from A1 to C1, and they're divided up over the 8 books. But the global scale of English gives you a much clearer idea of the progression that the students are making. Another big feature of the series is it has Exam View, which is a test bank sort of creation tool. So you have lots of tests, you know, for each unit, for halfway through the book, for the whole book, you know, all different alternative tests, but you can also create your own tests. You can take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, put it together. So it's a really powerful tool for assessing students as well. So, but because it's so tied to the global scale of English, students know exactly what their progress is as they go through, because the book itself, all the goals and listening, reading, writing, speaking, grammar, pronunciation, everything is tied super tightly to the progression that it should be. Yeah, it's not random.
Okay, how many questions can we ask? Ken, there is.
I'm fine, as long as people don't start going home.
Yeah, we have a long list of questions here.
Okay,
they're
why don't we
talking
have
about
3 or 4 more, and then what I can do is you can send me those questions. I will write answers, and then you can send all the answers to everyone, and then everybody can get maybe written answers, because that's maybe easier to think about a little bit. And if some of the questions are similar, then we'll answer both of them. So give me 3 more. Let's try that.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. That's what we'll do. And to everybody, you're going to get the recording of the session. So don't worry about it. Patricia also asked, is metacognition an example of making students more responsible?
Is what an example?
Metacognition. Metacognition.
Metacognition. Okay, so metacognition, yeah, absolutely. So for people who don't understand what are not familiar with the term metacognition, it's the meta means overreaching. Cognition means understanding. So it's the bigger understanding of things. And of course, that's what we want students to do, is to have a larger understanding. Most students come to class and they're not sure what they're learning or why they're learning. If you ask 100 students, you know, why are you studying English? Like 99 of them will usually say, because I have to, right? You know, teacher makes me, or something like that. They don't really understand some of the principles and the purposes going on underneath. And sometimes that's not a problem, because, you know, in some cases they should just be focusing on learning and not thinking too much about it. But metacognition really refers to the whole idea of trying to understand the reasons why we're learning, the ideas behind it. And that can be helpful for some students, especially adults, like startups audience. Yeah.
Perfect. There's a question regarding the app. Where can they find the app, and how can they type into Play Store?
Okay, so go to if you have an iPhone, go to the iTunes store. If you have an Android phone, which is everything else, go to Google Play and look for Pearson Practice English. You can download the app, and then when you get it, go to Startup, and you can get the first, I think it's the first unit or something of every level, all 8 levels. You can get them. They may not all be up yet, but try the first level, and you can sort of explore it and see what it's like. It's quite fun, yeah. So Pearson Practice English on Google Play or the app or the iTunes store.
Then the last question would be, could I apply these strategies for English young learners?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that. And as I said at the very, very beginning, I hope that there's nothing that I said that does not apply to young learners. In fact, learners of all ages, they're facing many of the same things. Again, we talked about the tools that they use, and of course, even young children now, they seem to have phones. It's becoming increasingly common. I'm shocked. I'm always shocked when I see, you know, sort of like a 6-year-old pull out a phone. I'm thinking, really? Your parents give you a phone? And so they have the tools, right? They have different contexts, and of course, they're looking further into the future than we can imagine from when they will grow up. But even now, they can sort of see that they are communicating, using digital things. They're more digital savvy. They understand digital technologies more naturally, so that's a big thing with them. And they're able to use those phones really effectively. So, so again, all the tools, the contexts are different. They understand that. They're moving into new areas. So yeah, all those things are the same, but again, pushing responsibility back onto them. You know, always make the students, and younger students are sometimes much more open to that idea. You say, okay, I want you to teach the class. Me? And they're so excited. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. But why not? Have them just teach a tiny little bit of the class. It builds responsibility. And as you know, as teachers, everything you learn twice if you teach it. You learn much better. So again, giving them the opportunities to do that builds responsibility. It also makes them feel special, and yeah, and they also get a little more respect for the teachers because they can realize suddenly how difficult it can be to sort of stand in front of the class and do what you do, you know, 5 days a week or 6 days a week. So that's great. Definitely apply it to young children.
Thank you very much. We want to thank you, Ken, for everything. And I want to let everybody know that we're going to have more sessions. There are 4 more sessions throughout Thursday.
That's right. The next one is on 2nd of May at 3 o'clock at the same time, 3 o'clock Mexican time. Yeah. And that's Goals for Contemporary Adult English Learners. This is a fun lecture, a very fun lecture. So yeah, so be there for that.
So thank you very much, everybody, for being present, and we'll see you then here next Thursday.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. And bring your friends. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.